The forgetting happened on a Tuesday, not dramatically, not with fire or invasion or the kind of arrival that makes people look up at the sky. It happened in the specific quiet way that the most dangerous things happen, underneath everything in the places where the foundations are while everyone was looking somewhere else. I know it was Tuesday because Tuesday was when I ran my weekly archive synchronization on the deep storage unit in my research station on the outer Carathorods. And the synchronization log was the first place I saw it. 17,482 records. Gone. Not corrupted, not misplaced. Removed with the specific clean precision of something that had been designed to remove and had been given time to do it, thoroughly. My name is Kira Voss, and I was, at the moment I discovered what had happened, a xenohistorian working on a 12-year project documenting the settlement patterns of outer belt human colonies. Not important work in the sense that anyone outside my very specific field found it interesting. Important in the sense that records matter and someone has to keep them. I ran the synchronization and found 17,000 records gone and sat very still for a moment. Then I checked the broader network Coalition Historical Archive. Gone. Outer Belt Census Records. Gone. Human Colony Registry. Gone. Station Personnel Records. Gone. Everything that documented that humans had been in the Outer Belt, had built things, had lived in places, had names and histories, and the specific weight of people who had existed in a specific time and place. Gone. I checked something else. The people themselves. I opened a communication channel to my colleague Ren on Station Carath 4, a human xenobiologist I had worked with for 6 years. He answered. I said, Ren, I need to ask you something unusual. He said, of course. I said, what species are you? A pause. He said, I do not understand the question. I said, it is a simple question. I said, what species are you? Another pause longer. He said, I do not know. He said slowly. His voice had the specific quality of someone reaching for something and finding nothing where something should be. I said, what is your earliest memory? He said, Carath 4 Station, he said. Working. He said he did not have a before. I closed the channel. I sat in my research station and understood what had happened. The Valdorian Memory Collective, a fringe faction within the larger Valdorian Compact that had been classified as a low-level threat by Coalition intelligence for years, had developed and deployed a targeted neurological signal that disrupted species identity memory formation in human-compatible biology. Combined with a coordinated archive deletion protocol that had apparently been in preparation for considerably longer than anyone had known, they had removed humans from the record and from themselves simultaneously. I knew this because I had been studying them, not intentionally. 3 years ago, I had found references to the Memory Collective in historical documents I was cataloging and had followed the thread out of pure academic habit, the kind of thread that does not seem important until it suddenly is. I had compiled a research file that I had never published because it was incomplete and because nothing in it had suggested urgency. The research file was in my deep storage unit. The deep storage unit was not connected to the main network. It had not been connected to the main network for 4 months. Because I had been running a cataloging project that required isolated storage to prevent data contamination. The deletion protocol had swept the network. My deep storage had not been on the network. I still had 17,000 records. I still had my research file on the Memory Collective. I still had my own identity, intact and complete, because whatever the neurological signal had done to connected humans, my station had been running on isolated power during a routine maintenance cycle when the signal was deployed, and my exposure had been insufficient for full effect. I sat with this for 47 minutes. 47 minutes of understanding exactly what I had, and what it meant, and what the available options were, and which of them were worth taking. Then I started working. The first thing I did was establish the scope. I sent carefully worded communications to 31 human contacts across the Outer Belt, asking questions that would tell me whether their identity memory was intact without alerting anyone who might be monitoring to what I was doing. 30 contacts responded with the empty quality I had heard in Ren's voice. One did not respond at all. I was the only one. The second thing I did was document everything I knew in a format that could be transmitted, verified, and acted upon by non-human coalition authorities who would still have their records and their identities and the institutional standing to do something. This took 19 hours. Not because the documentation was complex, because I was building it to be undeniable. Every record I had, every cross-reference, every piece of evidence that humans had existed and built things and lived in the Outer Belt, organized into a complete and verifiable archive that could stand up to scrutiny from people who would want to disbelieve it, because disbelieving it was easier than acting on it. I knew it had to be undeniable because I was one person with an isolated storage unit and a research file making a claim that sounded like the premise of a story nobody would want to take seriously. I made it undeniable. The third thing I did was transmit it to three separate authorities simultaneously: the Outer Belt Coalition Intelligence Division, the Kethiran Historical Preservation Authority, and a Valdorian senior archivist I had corresponded with professionally for 4 years who I had reason to believe was not affiliated with the Memory Collective faction and who had the institutional standing within Valdorian structures to create pressure from inside. Then I waited. The Coalition Intelligence Division responded in 6 hours with a request for verification protocols that told me they were taking it seriously enough to check rather than dismiss. The Kethiran Historical Preservation Authority responded in 9 hours with a team deployment confirmation. The Valdorian archivist responded in 11 hours with a message that was 3 sentences long. The first sentence said she had verified 3 records from my archive against physical historical artifacts in her personal collection that predated the deletion protocol. The second sentence said she was escalating internally at the highest level she could access. The third sentence said she was sorry. The coalition response operation took 11 days. The neurological signal the Memory Collective had deployed was reversible, which the coalition medical teams established within the first 48 hours, requiring a specific counter-signal that took 9 days to develop and 2 days to deploy at network scale. The archive restoration took considerably longer. 17,000 records were not the complete picture. The complete picture was assembled over 4 months from my deep storage, from physical artifacts from the memories that came back as the counter-signal worked, and from records that coalition investigators found in Memory Collective facilities that the faction had preserved for their own documentation purposes without understanding that documentation was a Volan. Airability. Humans came back, not all at once, not cleanly, in the specific gradual way that memory returns when the thing preventing it is removed. Fragments first, then context, then the full weight of a life that had been there all along, waiting to be recalled. Ren called me 6 weeks after the counter-signal deployment. He said, "Kira?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I remember," he said. His voice was different from the last time. Full in a way it had not been. I said, "I know." He said, "You held it," he said, while the rest of us couldn't. I said I was in the right place at the right time with the wrong network connection, I said. That was all. He was quiet for a moment. He said it was not all. I said the archive was the important thing, I said. The records. Without the records, the counter-signal would have returned the memories, but without the context. People need the records as much as they need the memories. The memories need somewhere to land. He said, "That is why you spent 19 hours making it undeniable." I said, "Yes." He said, "You were one person with an isolated storage unit." I said, "It was what I had." I said, "I used what I had." He was quiet again. Then he said something that stayed with me long after the call ended. He said the Memory Collective thought they could erase us by removing the records and disrupting the memories, he said. They did not understand that a species that has been keeping records for as long as we have understands something about records that goes past the records themselves. I said, "What do you think that is?" He said, "We keep records because we know we are forgettable." He said, "We have always known it. Every individual life is finite and specific and eventually gone. We keep records because we know the forgetting is real, and we build against it anyway." He said, "That is why one person with one isolated storage unit was enough." He said, "Because we built the Rusha for exactly that moment, whether we knew it or not." I sat with that for a long time after we finished talking. Outside my research station, the outer Kareth corridor ran through the dark the way it always had, and inside the station, the deep storage unit held 17,000 records and a research file, and the specific weight of everything that had almost been lost. I opened the cataloging project I had been working on before Tuesday. Settlement patterns of Outer Belt human colonies. 12 years of work. I picked up where I had left off. The records needed keeping. They always had.